What's up, guys? Welcome into another episode of the Wolverine Live Recruiting Show. And I accidentally had to tab in with the introduction music playing. So sorry about that. Like I said, this is another episode of the Wolverine Live Recruiting Show. I'm your host, EJ Hall, and alongside me is my furry friend, Zach Libby, who is wearing some type of weird coat.
It's a quarter zip, fuzzy quarter zip, Abercrombie and Fitch.
What are you, like 16?
No, they've had a whole rebrand. I know this is a recruiting show, but they've had a whole rebrand. You gotta get some stuff over there. It's legit. It's not the 16-year-old stuff like back in the day.
My wife told me that she was one of the models for Hollister when she was like a 13-year-old. And so I always think of Abercrombie and Finch and Hollister as strictly for children.
Like in the mid 2000s, yeah. But this is a different era. You got to give it the times, man.
I don't know, man. I don't know if I can go that route. Anyway, we're not here to talk about Libby's weird teenage fashion senses. We're here to talk about Michigan recruiting. And before we do that, I do want to remind you guys that we are sponsored tonight by our own magazine. We have a magazine, the Wolverine Special Commemorative Edition is out now. This commemorative edition was actually featured at Michigan's ring ceremony this past weekend. So you saw, the viral photos of JJ with all those rings. His table had a Wolverine magazine on it. You can get a commemorative issue like JJ and the rest of the team. This commemorative issue is available in a magazine softcover as well as a hardback book. Both versions include in-depth features on JJ, Blake Corum, and other stars from the national championship team, exclusive highlights on the dynamic defensive line, the path to the championship, comprehensive game-by-game coverage, stunning photography, insightful column stats, and much more. The magazine version is 148 full-color glossy pages. The book version is actually 144 ad-free glossy pages, and it is an actual hardback book. It's great to have on the coffee table, and you'll want to have it years from now to look back on. It's also a great gift idea. Like I said, there aren't a lot of holidays, but, the Passover's here. Spend some time around the family, get them a gift. Cinco de Mayo's coming up. There's some things you can get gifts. There's birthdays and such. Anyway, the Wolverine Magazine commemorative issue is a great gift and great personal item as well. So make sure to order yours today. And also, guys, this is the Super Chat show. So if you want a question answered on tonight's show, make sure to hit that little box with the dollar symbol, and that money goes directly to our travel budget so we can continue to see top recruits from around the country. All right. So, apparently John A. Schultz is a fan of Zach's teenage fashion sense. For the people that are just filing in, Zach's furry sweater is from Abercrombie and Fitch, which apparently has rebranded to not just include 13 to 16-year-olds.
Even 28-year-olds,
Even 28-year-olds can now wear. Who knows? Maybe Hollister will join them. I guess we'll find out on next week's show. Maybe Zach them all. Anyway, let's go. Let's go ahead and talk about some Michigan recruiting. So obviously, it's been super busy the last 48 hours. Michigan ended its commitment drought and landed top 100 defensive lineman / edge Nate Marshall out of Chicagoland. Pretty surprising commitment here. I don't think anybody really expected him to commit going into his spring game visit. In fact, Michigan was supposed to get his first OV the first weekend of June, and then Alabama and Miami were scheduled to get visits after that. And Miami, I know, was trending pretty well in this recruitment. It seemed like NIL could be a factor. Miami was scheduled to have the last visit. Even our On3 Miami writer texted me and was shocked and said that he spoke to some guys around the program over at Miami, and they were shocked as well. So, it was obviously a big win for Michigan from many perspectives. One, it ends the drought. It's 4 months, almost 4 months without getting a commitment. And two, Sharon Moore, obviously got his first commitment as the head coach at the University of Michigan. So that's big as well. And it helped spark some much needed momentum. So Zach, what was your reaction when, Nate Marshall dropped and gave Michigan a verbal commitment?
Yeah, I kind of agree because, when the last I spoke with him, we're leading up to the visit, when he told us that he was showing up, he was working towards setting up that official visit. And as you mentioned, Miami, Auburn, Alabama, Southern schools were making as big of a push for Marshall as Michigan was. And, when you saw him at the game, it felt very, it didn't really feel like a commitment was looming. There wasn't like, this hint. It obviously he had a great time. The recruiting staff made him and his family priorities. He got front row seats for the spring game. You saw him interacting with other key targets that were there on the visit, such as on 300 Edge, Marco Jones out of California. He came prepared, dressing warm. I think it was interesting too. There's one part of the visit that you saw him embracing one of Michigan basketball's assistant coaches because the coach is from Chicagoland, the area that Marshall's from. So that was cool to see. But overall, I guess my take overall is just that the consistency with Sharon Moore there too kind of helped Michigan along the way throughout this offseason because multiple coaching changes on the defensive line, and there was that constant with Moore having ties to Chicagoland, him visiting Marshall during the winter contact period, them getting to know, getting to reunite on campus this weekend. I think that's huge. But yeah, I mean, just from that standpoint, 6 straight recruiting cycles with the Chicagoland commit, the number 4 overall defensive lineman in the country, a kid who, as you mentioned, I think saw, experience this weekend and knew it was his home. And I think the transformational process that that's been talked about in depth for years, I think that's what made the difference. And that's good to see. I think the push from Lou Esposito, defensive line coach, was big. They've been in contact multiple times. So we'll see what he can do as a peer recruiter moving forward now that he's on board. And there are a number of targets that we are considering that, Marshall can have a big say in whether or not, they ultimately land them. So it's going to be fun. But overall, ending that 3+ month commitment drought, I think it's huge, and it's credit to the staff for sticking to their plan and working towards a more fruitful offseason this summer.
Yeah, I think it's big, like I said, on several fronts, but just to touch on those things again. One, with Sharon Moore, he put in a ton of effort into this recruitment personally. Marshall was one of the first kids that he saw during the winter contact period when he took over as head coach. So he made his way basically to Chicagoland immediately. And you also have to keep in mind that Sharon Moore was once the area recruiter in Chicagoland. So a lot of strong ties there. So, I think this shows Moore is going to be really involved and have a huge say and not necessarily be as hands off as Jim Harbaugh was. I think he's going to be, very hands-on when it comes to recruiting guys that he really feels are top of the board types. And Nathaniel Marshall was, it is the NIL era, and to beat out Miami and Alabama for, a top 100 kid, that's obviously huge. Now, I've gotten some questions. Has Michigan's NIL gotten better? I think this was just a straight up, surprising win. A great job by the coaching staff. I don't think it had anything to do with Michigan's NIL getting better. I think it all had to do with the relationship that Sharon Moore personally built, the impression that Lou Esposito made on this visit, and just how comfortable they felt at home. And I think that Marshall and his family really bought into the culture and the development at Michigan. So, I think the staff just did a great job. I still think they're pretty handicapped by a lack of a true NIL plan when it comes to recruiting, but it shows that this staff is capable of winning recruitments that have NIL teams in them, especially for a big target like Nathaniel Marshall, and potentially for another big target who we'll talk about here in a second in Marquise Davis. So Michigan can win these recruitments in this era. It's just about relationship building and finding the right kids that are ranked high to really fit the culture. But as John A. Schultz says, dear college football gods, please don't let Miami and their NIL steal them from us. So, like I said, Miami was scheduled to get the last visit. They were feeling really good. It came as a shock to the Hurricanes. So I don't think Miami is ever going to go away. So this staff is going to have to continue to fight to keep Marshall on board, as others will continue to recruit him. As a player, you see his highlights here, and a lot of his tape is him with his hand in the dirt, playing some nose. Michigan likes him as a pass rusher, but you don't see a whole lot of that. And when it comes to his build, he's a guy that kind of has a compact frame, an evenly distributed frame. So he's not a super long kid, like a really tall, long kid, like a Lugardette or a Devin Baxter. I think he's a guy that could spin down and play some 4-eye. He could follow the same, path as maybe a Chris Jenkins and just really bulk up. He could stay or he could project as a pass rusher like Michigan sees him. I think he's more of a tweener, so he's just a really interesting kid. But from an athletic standpoint, he has it. He has all the raw tools. He has a great get off, great first step. He had an uncle that played in the NBA. His mom played Division I college basketball. He himself was a basketball player growing up. So, from an athletic standpoint, it's all there. I'm just curious to see how he fits into Michigan's scheme. Zach, any final thoughts on the Marshall commitment?
Yeah, I think it's just, I think the shift in narrative too is interesting, right? Because we're talking, the last 36 hours, it's been very positive in terms of just overall vibes and how people are feeling. It's a drastic shift from much of the off season where, the question of whether it should be, go in panic mode or not. I think it's the timeline of this weekend. I think, there's optimism for what lies ahead for sure.
All right. So Marshall on board, Michigan trying to close with another top target today on 300. Running back Marquise Davis is on campus for another unofficial visit. This is his third visit of the spring. Now, Zach was the first to report it earlier today, so kudos to Zach. And I said when Zach when Zach put up the story over at the Wolverine that we weren't going to put in predictions. Now, I know there's been predictions on other sites. Reason being for us is we were told not to do the prediction stuff, so we're honoring that and won't be putting in predictions. But I think it's been very well documented how we feel about Marquise Davis. Ohio State is the heavy leader on the On3 recruiting prediction machine because we haven't put in predictions. But, I think Michigan has the clear lead here. I think it's obvious that the Wolverines are in a very, very strong position and are very capable of closing this recruitment at any time. Davis does have some official visits scheduled. You have schools like Kentucky, Ohio State, obviously Florida, Tennessee that are still in the mix as well. But I think Michigan getting him on campus 3 times is very, very significant. And also Marquise isn't a guy that makes a lot of visits. You don't see him all over social media posting he's here and there. Even this last one where it was kind of literally the same situation. Like the second visit he made in the spring, we were notified by his coach and then put it out there and he retweeted it. This time it was the same thing. Like, he's not a guy that's just advertising his visits and trying to be involved in the recruiting hoopla. And I say that to say that I think Marquise is very straightforward and business-like. And I think he'll, I don't think he's a guy that wants to just enjoy the process to enjoy the process. I think Michigan has that prime opportunity. The relationship with Tony Alford is there. Alford has recruited well out of Cleveland Heights in the past as well. He landed several players out of Cleveland Heights during his time at Ohio State. And this would be an absolute massive victory for the Wolverines. So we'll see if Michigan can get it done sooner rather than later. And even if a commitment doesn't come, ASAP, I think Michigan's positioned itself well to eventually close if they don't do it now. Zach, how are you feeling about the recruitment?
I mean, I felt very good as soon as Tony Alford was hired this past month, considering the fact that they've known each other for many years, going back all the way to the beginning of Marquise Davis's recruitment when it started. And that includes, Alford's primary recruiting area being Cleveland. So he's known Davis's confidants, including his head coach, for over a decade. The fact that Alford is in the fold and is the primary recruiter at Michigan for Davis is making such a huge difference that 3 visits in a month span. I think along with that, reasons for him to continue visiting is just overall running back production. I mean, this is a kid who rushed for 2,400 yards. This is a reigning Gatorade Player of the Year. He saw Michigan beat Ohio State in the impact at the Big House and saw the impact that Blake Corum had. He saw the national championship and Donovan Edwards' impact. And, when you watch a game like Penn State last season and you see that the running backs get 32 straight carries it goes back to what Davis told us, earlier this month, that any resource that a running back wants is provided at Michigan. As you mentioned, I think, he knows what he's looking for. It's all about relationships. It's all about best opportunity on field wise and off the field. A very high intelligent kid on and off the field. So I think what Michigan can give him to better himself as a person and as a player, I think it's resonating very well for him and his loved ones. So overall, I think the job that Michigan has done in these past 4 weeks, 5 weeks is just tremendous. And you're seeing that the effort that's been put in to land a potential early impact player. And not only that, potentially landing the second, back-to-back running backs in the state of Ohio who are considered the best of the position in state. So overall, phenomenal job.
Yeah, and obviously Marquise would be absolutely massive. This is the guy that's at the very top of the Michigan running back board. I mean, they really value him even more so than his ranking, as do I. If you are familiar with our YouTube channel or you're a subscriber to the Wolverine, you know that I've been banging the Marquise drum forever. And so is Zach. I have him graded extremely high in the top 100 for sure. I've said, beforehand that I think he's a better prospect than Jordan Marshall. He beat out Jordan Marshall for the Gatorade Player of the Year in the state of Ohio last year. He was extremely productive, more than 2,000 yards rushing. He's explosive. He's dynamic. He could even play on the defensive side of the ball. He's just an elite level athlete. So, with Marquise Davis, you're getting a game changer that can be a home run threat. I think Jordan Marshall is a guy that's going to be very consistent, move the chains, be a workhorse back. With Davis, you're getting a lot of flash and pizzazz, and there's just so much to really like about his game and what he brings to the table. And so, it would also be a massive land just, from a general recruiting perspective of Michigan getting high-end talent out of Ohio, to go into enemy territory and beat out Ohio State for Jordan Marshall, to follow that up by going into Ohio and beating out Ohio State for Marquise Davis. It signifies a shift in the rivalry. And I think it signifies that Michigan can land elite talent out of Ohio. And now that you have Tony Alford on staff, look, I know Coach Steve Klingscale did a good job of establishing relationships in Ohio, and he was an Ohio guy. But I think Tony Alford can just take that to the next level and continue to help the Wolverines land top talent, not just at running back, but at other positions out of Ohio. So, I think Alford's done a fantastic job. Everybody knows that I think he's an upgrade over Mike Hart, so we don't need to get into that. But I think Alford has just killed it from a recruiting standpoint. To get Davis in for 3 visits this spring is a win in itself, and if he's able to seal the deal here soon, just a massive, massive victory, and will help really build on that momentum. And hey, you get an offense that has Carter Smith and Marquise Davis, man, you run that read option all day long. That's scary. And that's not even including, Jordan Marshall as well. Now you just have to get the guys on the outside to sling the rock to. But, if not counting our what's the saying, counting the chickens before they hatch, we don't want to do that just yet. But, obviously we're very excited about the possibility of Marquise ending up at Michigan. Now, we've had several new viewers join. We have more than 160 people in the show right now. So make sure to like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and subscribe to the Wolverine.com for just $1 for 1 month. I know the predictions are coming in elsewhere, but we've been on top of the Marquise recruitment for a while. So yeah, take advantage of that. It's actually $1 for 2 months. So my bad on the false advertisement. Use the code UM1. And also for people asking questions in the chat box, this is the Super Chat show. So if you want a Super Chat answered, make sure to click that little box sign with the dollar symbol that goes directly to our travel budget so we can continue to see top recruits around the country. All right, so let's talk about spring game. Obviously, Michigan landed that commitment from Nate Marshall, but there were plenty of other recruiting storylines. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I apologize for saying that it was 1 month. I guess you got 2 months for $1. So, sorry for people that didn't take advantage. But anyway, yeah, let's talk about spring game. Nate Marshall committed. Like I said, there were other storylines. Zach, what was your biggest takeaway from a recruiting perspective from the spring game?
I think you mentioned this too. I think it's the consensus takeaway. Not only is Marquise Davis visiting today for the 3rd time, this past Saturday, Michigan hosted 4-star offensive lineman Avery Groves a 3rd time for the spring game.
Avery Gash. You called him Avery Groves like his high school.
Did I? My fault. Avery Gash, an in-stater, 4-star, who's been categorized as a must land for Michigan long before, Grant Newsome got promoted as offensive line coach, long before Sharon Moore got promoted as head coach. It's a kid who's been to Michigan 9 times on 9 unofficial visits, 3 of them, obviously, when Sharon Moore is head coach. I mean, look, this is, I think, knowing he was there so many times to build a relationship that mirrors with Newsome, that mirrors what he's already built with Moore for over 18 months, I think his comfort and familiarity around the players, his fit on the offensive line, I guess off the field resources like the Ross Business School, his thoughts on strength and conditioning coach Justin Schress. I guess all of that put together, you feel confident that Michigan leads. And it's I think if you're a big time offensive lineman too, and you come from the Metro Detroit area, and you've seen a school like Michigan win 2 Joe Moore Awards each of the last 3 seasons, I think it just so much goes into favor for the Wolverines to end up landing a marquee prospect like Avery Gash, who, I've seen live a couple of times, once in game and multiple times in training. And, this is a kid who's right now around 290 pounds, but moves very well. If you in game, he plays right tackle, but he might slide inside. He has that versatility. I think the teachings of Grant Newsome have resonated. I think being led by a coach who once played offensive line, your positional coach and your head coach are former offensive linemen. I think that's huge. So overall, bringing him back for that spring game, I think kind of solidified from my standpoint that Michigan is the leader.
Yeah, I mean, not only is Michigan the leader, you could see the Wolverines potentially close sooner rather than later, which, I mentioned on last week's show that I was feeling that it was going that way. And I think the spring visit kind of reinforced those thoughts as well. Gash listed Michigan in his top four, releasing a top four that also included Ohio State, Michigan State, and Wisconsin. But I'm not really scared of any of those schools. There hasn't been much buzz with Ohio State in forever. He is a Michigan State legacy, but even the Sparty Riders have thrown in the towel there. And when you look at Wisconsin, I don't even think they've been mentioned too much. So, all signs still point to Michigan here, and that they would love to get him in the class now. I think the offensive line numbers are going to be a little bit tight, and Gatch is at the very top of the board. So, they'd like to build the offensive line class around him and continue to build that momentum. So, yeah, I mean, I feel like a decision could come sooner than that expected summer timeline that he had initially set. So I have had a prediction in since November, and I still feel really, really good about that, obviously. So Gash was obviously one of the big targets on campus for the spring game. There were several other recruits. Zach, anything else you want to add from the spring game? You were there on campus, got to see all the recruits. Anything else you want to add?
Yeah. Sorry. Bobby Kanka, 4-star. Sorry. Sorry.
Zach's having an episode.
Sorry. 4-star defensive line commit, Bobby Kanka out of Howell High, returned to Michigan for the first time this offseason. I think the biggest takeaway from that is that new defensive line coach, Lou Esposito, got to meet with the family, got to speak with the family. Esposito plans on being at Howell once the coaches hit the road for the spring evaluation period. Sharon Moore was able to speak with Bobby as well and his loved ones. I mean, I think we've reported, ad nauseum, I guess, about Kanka's planned official visits elsewhere. Tennessee, Michigan State, Michigan, with the Spartans, they're pushing hard. The Volunteers have been involved with going up and seeing Kanka, throughout the offseason, but I think just from I'm going to take a quote from what he told us, it was just good to be back home. I don't know if people were concerned, but, Michigan is still the place that he wants to be. And, we can talk about the reasons why, but I think, he's been there long before he was even considered a recruit. And if you look at the potential that Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant have in first-round draft picks, I think that speaks a lot for a kid like Bobby Kanka. So overall, I think just allowing him to be back on campus, being at the big house and being with the coaching staff, that was very important as, communication between him and Esposito continue over the phone, and, his relationship with Moore continues to get closer.
Yeah, I have two more takeaways before we get out of here and call it a night. So last call for super chats, last call to like the video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and last call for the OT question of the day. All right, the two takeaways I have is, one, I don't think enough people are talking about Marco Jones on 300 Edge out of California. I feel like he was one of the highest ranked kids there that people just don't seem to have a lot of buzz on. And probably because we haven't talked about him in like forever. He picked up a Michigan offer more than a year ago, and it never seemed like Michigan was a serious contender in this race. This was his first visit. But, Michigan made a strong move with Marco Jones on this visit. I think that he's getting ready to, really narrow things down even further. He already released a top 10, but I think he's going to get even more serious here really soon. I think Michigan is going to get one of his official visits for sure. And I think Michigan is a top 3 school right now. I know the On3 recruiting prediction machine does not reflect that, but if you ask me where Michigan sits, I would say top 3 for Marco Jones for sure. I think they made a power move this weekend. I think Lou Esposito really connected well. And I think that Jones just really liked what Michigan had to offer. The other interesting thing about Marco Jones is his profile lists him at 6'4", 215. He actually measured in at Michigan at 6'5", 240. So I don't know if you had a chance to, size him up, Zach, but he came in pretty big at Michigan, which makes his athletic profile even more exciting because his film's really fun to watch, and he is a plus baseball player as well. And if you watch the show, you know that I love guys that can play at baseball. It's a hard sport, and I always sucked at it, and I think it translates well to the football field. So, I think Marco Jones is a really, really interesting prospect, and I think Michigan has built a little bit of momentum in this race, and I think more people need to talk about Jones. The other takeaway I have, the final takeaway I have here is Carter Smith, Michigan's quarterback commit, was on campus Wednesday through Sunday. So he got an extended look at his future home. He was on campus for basically a week. And man, he really enjoyed his time on campus. He really fit in well with the culture and the team and got to see more of the city and everything. And he's completely locked in, man. Other schools have continued to keep in contact, including, NIL schools like Texas A&M. They're one I can say that has continued to try to keep in touch with Carter Smith. Things kind of just brush them aside because he's fully bought into what Michigan has to offer on and off the field. He's also taking a lot of pride in being a class leader. Now, Carter's not all over social media, but he is a guy that's been nonstop texting these recruits. He was working hard on a lot of these guys at the spring game, including Nate Marshall, who obviously ended up committing. He worked on Avery Gash a lot at the spring game, and then turned around and had a 45-minute conversation with him the other day. You saw I don't know if all of you saw this, but, we had a graphic out where Elijah Melendez, Miami's linebacker commit who recently visited Michigan, he, had the quote where he said, Carter said, "You're a beast, come to Michigan, but don't come here if you want the BS. We're going to win and we're going to develop." And, he has a very similar mentality to JJ McCarthy. They actually got to spend a little bit of time together on the visit, and they are, obviously I covered JJ and saw him 39 times or whatever, was the count of live evaluations that Sam Webb said I made. So I saw JJ like 39 times. And I guess I'll see Carter around the same. I've already been out to see him many times. And, I really like just his personality. And I can see the correlation with JJ just from a leadership standpoint and just having that little extra sauce about him, man. It's hard to describe, but there's just, something that makes you want to gravitate towards Carter. And, I was told that the staff really loves spending their time with him this weekend as well. And, we've talked about him on last week's show after Elite 11. He's getting a lot better as a passer. He's the Florida Gatorade Player of the Year. Man, if you have a backfield where you have Carter Smith, who won the Florida Gatorade Player of the Year as a junior, and Florida is right up there with Texas and California as the best high school playing state in the country. And then you have the Ohio Gatorade Player of the Year. And Ohio is also up there as one of the best high school football playing states in the country. That's such a dynamic and dangerous duo of Smith and Marquise Davis, of course, is what I'm talking about. But yeah, I think that, Carter's not where JJ was as a passer, but from just a leadership standpoint, a playmaking ability, Carter definitely has that. And Carter's, bigger than JJ was and more of a downhill runner, more of a true, get this guy in on some design run plays. So that, their games are similar, but different at the same time. And, but I think the thing that sticks out is just the charisma, the leadership, and taking pride in leading a class for the University of Michigan. And Michigan really hasn't had that since JJ. There hasn't been a quarterback that's been out there actively recruiting that guys really love and want to play with. And Carter is definitely doing his job and playing his role despite, all the staff turnover and stuff. And, it's cool to see Carter, not to completely go on this tangent, but it's cool to see Carter do this thought just came to my mind. It's cool to see Carter do this during an offseason full of change. He committed to Michigan while Jim Harbaugh was still the coach. Then there was an offseason of change. And instead of bailing and, being an NIL kid and going to Texas A&M or something like that, he's stuck with it and has been such a big ambassador. And if you remember during JJ's recruitment, there was a time where things looked really bad. JJ had that whole weekend set up during COVID where him and a bunch of guys visited, and then they got blown out by whoever it was, Wisconsin. And, Michigan had a losing season and it looked terrible. And JJ's message was just stay calm. And he kept everybody together and rallied the troops. So you can kind of see the parallels there. And that's been really cool to follow. And like I said, there just hasn't been a quarterback like this since JJ. So, it's been super fun to cover Carter so far. And I know he made a strong impression on a lot of guys at the spring game. So that's about it. Zach, I do have to ask you, did you go back to the dine-in theater? You have not gone back. Well, you are on mute, so nobody can hear you. But that answers our question.
Nothing good out right now. I got to wait until something good is available for me to watch that's worth spending $60 on.
Yeah, for new viewers, Zach has never gone to a theater where he can actually eat food. So we're anxiously waiting for his
edge of our seat.
For his review. I do have to say, I need to look up when Twisters is coming out because that's the next movie that I would say I'm excited.
Oh, no, I'm not watching that.
That's because you're a Gen Z, man. You don't qualify. You don't qualify for like the 90s Twister that was super hype at the time. You don't remember the cow scene.
I know we're a recruiting podcast, but I'll just say it's a dumb idea for a movie. And it's a dumb premise.
Wow. Look at that. Zach thinks Twisters is stupid.
Yeah, there's a tornado, just go the other direction.
You're not from Texas. You don't know what it's like. Get out of here, Zach.
Go somewhere else.
Go somewhere else.
I don't get it.
Yeah, anytime there's just mass destruction from a tornado, we'll make sure to tell the victims they should have gone somewhere else.
It's just, the premise of this one, it's like they're chasing it. That's a thing now. So I just don't understand that. Like, you did that yourself. You are like, I don't feel bad because you did this.
Okay, well, Zach will not be watching Twisters and indulging in nostalgia. But anyway, that does it for our show. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and for more Michigan recruiting coverage, hit that like and subscribe button, and subscribe to the Wolverine, where you can get it for 2 months for $1 apparently. And Zach and I will be on the road this weekend seeing plenty of targets. So we'll have plenty of scoop coming over. So don't miss out on your chance to subscribe. We will see you, or I will see you tomorrow for the Q&A show. Zach will see you next week.